The stories speak of our ancient world, Eleanor. They speak of primordial beings who made this world and their descendant gods who fought and dethroned them. They speak of wars between those gods and their peoples. They speak of empires reaching up to the heavens and falling into dust, now buried deep below the earth. Eleanor is a world of legends, magic, and mystery, a world of heroes. This is but one story, but a story which will be remembered for ages to come. This story begins within the continent of Telesia, in the northern kingdom of Patris, under the reign of mighty King Hector, the guardian angel. You've all gathered in the town of Goldcrest, the Mountain Watch. Some of you journeyed from the far reaches of the land to get here. Goldcrest is surrounded by history and peril. The seemingly endless gladiator forest spreads out to the west. Not even the elves mapped all of it. To the south, the famous Howling Peaks pierce the clouds and mark the borders of the Patrocian kingdom. Within these mountains, the king's army defeated the terrible threat, an orc invasion, just 20 years ago. The peaks are mostly unexplored, with rumors of great monstrosities that call this place home, and indeed, not all those who enter the pass live the frozen ridge. To the east, the barrens erupt from the earth, a harsh and rocky landscape that is home to many evil races and outlaws. At its center, looming over the waste, is Dragon's Peak. During clear days, some say, a trail of smoke rises from this towering mountain, suggesting some sort of volcanic activity. Walking on Telesia's trail to the north will eventually take you to Titan's Reach, the capital of Patris and the seat of the king. Facing all the danger that surrounds it, Goldcrest still feels safe and calm. This old military outpost turned into a nexus of trade and adventuring. The town is surrounded by a stone wall and is built around the main fort at the center. Most buildings are made out of a combination of wood and stone and are made to endure the harsh weather that winter brings to this land. Out of the wall, there are a few farmsteads, and further south there's a military outpost where most of the army is stationed. The king's army, bearing the flag of the Griffin, are present in high numbers, but they mind very little to anything other than protecting the border and the wall. Being located between Caldera to the south and Titan's Reach to the north, Goldcrest hosts many traveling merchants from both cities. The fine wools, leathers, and weaponry of the north mixed with the rich fabrics, spices, and glassworks of the south. Walking the streets, you see quite a few stalls, hoping to lighten their wares before moving on to the next stop. You see people you can only assume to be adventurers, making their way in and out of the city, probably trying to find their fortune in a long-forgotten tomb or temple. In the middle of it all, you found a bustling tavern, the Armored Duck, a large wooden structure housing all sorts of curious folk, just like yourself. You gathered in here to meet with the gnome, Eldon Fiddlefan, as he promised you more information about your upcoming journey. Hi Internet, Aviatal here. That was the exposition I used to start one of my campaigns a few months ago. When we think about introducing the world to our players, there are many things to take into consideration. How much information is too much? What should we focus on? And how do we get from staring at a bunch of nerds to playing D&D with them? Aside from the exposition, there are a few out-of-game topics you should discuss as a group before you move into playing. This process is sometimes called a Session Zero. In this video, we'll break down what I think a Session Zero should look like. We'll also learn how to build an exposition that will inspire your players and start your game on the right foot. Let's get started. As much as we'd like to simply start playing the game which we all gathered for, we're still people in the real world, and people have their limits. Here are a few things you should consider discussing with your players before the game begins. Maintaining a campaign requires all participants to give a portion of their time, at the very least for the sessions themselves, so it's important to make sure everyone around the table is prepared for that commitment. Try to find an arrangement that works for everyone. Discuss how often you want the campaign to run. How long will each session be? Where will the meetings take place? What are the time limits of the people? And so on. In a campaign I run for students, we take a break during semester finals. I've mentioned this on our Session 0 and I saw that it made them less stressed about committing. Sessions can be long. In my case, most of them take around 4 hours, but some of them extend to 5 or even 6. So it's important to consider what are you going to eat. Starving yourself isn't recommended, and tactical food breaks during long sessions are not a bad idea. Characters often run into conflicts, especially at the beginning. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but player conflicts are. They spoil an experience which is supposed to be fun for everyone. When we play, we need a safe, accepting environment in which we can talk about issues that come up during the game. Let your players know that the game table is a place like that. Encourage them to open up and speak about things that bother them. That being said, throwing everyone off play in the middle of a session can disturb the flow of the game, so consider designating some time at the beginning or at the end of every session for that purpose. It's alright to disagree with whatever the players or the GM does. Humans are fallible, we make mistakes all the time. I think that most of us would like to get better at things we do, so giving feedback in a respectful manner is pretty helpful. I would recommend remembering 3 things when giving feedback. Do it privately so it won't appear like you attack the other person. Be civil, gentle, clear and constructive. Give the feedback that you would want to get. And last, remember that sometimes disagreement derives from different approaches and perspectives. Your feedback can be appreciated, but it can also be intrusive if you refuse to accept that there is more than one way to do something. I run D&D for adults, but that doesn't mean it's a game that has adult content. I don't go in depth describing sexual scenes, and I would never integrate non-consensual sex in any of the plots. I would ask my players to avoid bringing those subjects to the table. Those are some of my personal limits, and others have their own. I'd be content describing how the dismembered body of a human looks and smells like, but others can find such graphic details disturbing. Asking about those kind of things can prevent many uncomfortable situations, so let your players know what are your limits and ask them what are theirs. No 2 tables are alike, and they shouldn't aim to be. One of the most remarkable things about RPGs is that the story that you will tell together at your table will look nothing like the story someone else will. Every participant changes the group dynamic entirely, sometimes in a way we won't be able to predict until the game begins. This uncertainty isn't necessarily bad, but it could lead to some uncomfortable situations. Let's say we have a very charismatic player that plays, naturally, a very charismatic character. He might not even mean to hog the spotlight, but people will naturally let him talk and make a lot of the calls for the party. If you won't pay attention to this pattern and actively prevent it, you might find yourself running a game mostly for one person and some audience that watch the 2 of you. I find this situation, at least for me, to be quite tedious. Now there are ways to get other players to participate as a GM. We could have some NPCs ask them questions directly, or force situations that they can't rely on their charismatic companion. These tools can help, but they only take care of the symptoms. If you want our game to include everyone, we should state it in session 0. We should encourage the players to share the spotlight and commend them when we notice they do it, preferably after the session. The more we play, the more games we run, the more we learn about ourselves and about the things that are important to us. Sharing the spotlight is one lesson, and I can make a video just about that, maybe I will. But the point is that session 0 is the place you share those lessons and the players share their own takes on what makes a game fun for them. A few other ideals, if you will, that I usually mention at session 0 would be characters should be team players and not lone wolves. The GM is not your enemy, but he will roleplay them. And we build a story together. Your backstories, decisions and goals will direct it. After that's done, we should ask our players to talk a little. Ask them what they enjoy in a role-playing game. Experienced players might have well-defined or even complex answers, while new players, none. I went to a GM workshop a few weeks ago. It was a really fruitful meeting, but there's a lesson that, at least for me, was the most important, so I'll share it with you guys. You may not agree with it immediately, but hear me out. Sometimes the players think they like one thing, but actually like something else entirely. So I believe it is vital to take everything they say into consideration. It is even more important to question those things and test them as the game progresses. Look for the flare in their eyes. Pay attention to the things that make them smile or even yell in excitement. Those are the things they like. Analyze what it was that excited them and you will be able to bring more of it in the future. This is something you won't be able to do right off the bat, especially if you're not familiar with the players. I might talk more about studying your players in a future video, but simply keeping it in mind is a powerful tool on its own. The rules we use are important. They are the guidelines to simulate the game world. If you want certain game elements to have a significant impact, we'll need to make sure they have a representation in the game mechanics. For example, saying that a character is afraid of the dragon is one thing, but applying the frightened condition actually limits the choices the character can make. This translation intensifies the fear, because this is how people act when they are in terror. This is a condition we can understand, and in this case, the rules benefit the simulation. Because of that, and the fact that different groups use different rules, the rules should be talked over with the players. I won't go in depth, but you should at least mention the following. Do you use optional or house rules, like flanking, feats, downtime, special rules for death, something else? How do you level up? Do it with experience points, the milestone system, or something else entirely? Which content can the players choose their race, class, abilities or backgrounds from? I've heard a few people saying that Session 0 is where you tell your players about the genre of the game. Well, if you haven't until now, you should definitely tell them. But this is actually something I'll tell them before they even arrive. I'll tell them that as part of me inviting them into the campaign. If I want to run D&D but in space, I won't omit this part when I tell them about it in the first place. In order to create their characters, the players will need some information about the setting. The reason I stretch the word some is because we don't want to bombard them with walls of text, even if we have them at the ready. Massive info dumps are likely to lead to a bunch of very confused players. So we need to consider which information is important. For example, if the kingdom is in a losing war against armies of giants, as citizens of the kingdom, the player characters will probably know something about it. The war is likely to influence their lives and story. On the other hand, some details are better kept for later. They are not essential for the beginning and may only prove relevant later in the story. Let's say Pelor the sun god is a prominent deity in our world. We want the players to know him. Our first option is to start mentioning all the gods in the setting, but this leads to an info dump, so instead, let's consider the following description during a game session. You walk down the cobble-paved streets of Redwood and reach a towering stone cathedral. Angelic statues decorate the roof, watching over the passers-by. Before you are a set of iron-cast double doors, with the image of a golden sun intricately inlaid just above them. You recognize this as a symbol of Pelor, the god of the sun, agriculture and time. Better, isn't it? By describing Pelor in this manner, we made the god more memorable and revealed that he is well known and worshipped. We didn't ask them to make a skill check for such obvious information. We showed them instead of telling them. And that's a powerful tool. So how do we know which information to share? My guideline is the following. If the information is crucial for the players to design or roleplay their character, I share it with them before Session 0. So by the time they reach Session 0, the players should have at least a vague image of their character. This gives them something to work with when the game begins. When they have time later in the campaign, you can sit together and flesh out the finer details. I talk more about it in the backstory video. A link should appear on the screen about now. Of course, this is just my take on the subject, and it won't always work out. Sometimes the players won't have time before the first meeting, and that's fine. Real world takes priority. If that happens, sit down with the players and try to create a character together. For that purpose, the player's handbook is a wonderful asset. For now, let's assume everyone has a general idea of the character they'll play. The next thing we should bring up is the status of the party, if it has one at all. Are they all mercenaries, friends, complete strangers? These questions should be answered by the GM before the game begins, even before Session 0. This is something we need to take into consideration when we plan the first adventure. Right now I can think of a few options you can choose from. You can tell them about the hook in advance. For example, you were all hired by someone to investigate ancient ruins. If that is the case, each player should try to understand what brought their character to accept this sort of mission. Did they do it for the money? Wanderlust? Are they running away from something? Is it a chance to prove themselves? Did they come because they want to protect another member of the party? Whatever the reason, there should be at least one. The second, riskier method is to have the characters become a party because of circumstances that you will present during the game. This is dangerous because it requires that you predict reactions of characters you don't yet know. So, done right, it could feel like an honest friendship that builds naturally. But if done wrong, it might feel railroaded, or worse. Characters won't even have a reason to stay and they'll simply leave. Another option is to determine that they all know each other for a while. This is my least favorite option because the roleplay doesn't feel natural unless the players spend a lot of time building their relationship with each other. A good trick to build an interesting dynamic is to divide the players into 2 or 3 groups. Now we have 2 or 3 smaller adventuring parties. Put them in separate rooms if you can and let them build the story of how they came to know each other. Ask them to share a little more about their characters in that group to represent the fact that they have traveled together for a while. You can even run a mini session for each group if everyone's up to it. Of course, that would mean you wouldn't get to play together immediately, but it could be worth it in the long run. The last thing we do before we start playing is building the character sheets. Why? Because until now the players didn't see the whole picture, they didn't know the person they are about to play. Building it now will make more sense to them, the choices will be easier, and I believe the character sheets will better represent their characters. Now we're almost good to go, all we need is to get everyone in the right mood, and for that we have... should appear on the screen... no? Here we are, Exposition. So, a play, novel, etc., dialogue description, etc. that gives the audience or reader the background of the characters and the present situation. Right? The readers in our case are the players, so what I take from it is the following. We need something that will describe to our players what is the present situation of their characters and the world around them. But it is more than that. Exposition is a powerful tool that promotes our sense of immersion. It makes it easier to play entirely different people in an imaginary world. That's a lot to ask from a little piece of text, but we're going to try anyway. Here's what I think an exposition should contain. Tell them something about the history of the world they're in. Whatever it is, make it sound ancient and mysterious. Then focus on the kingdom or country, the larger area that the campaign will take place in. Incorporate one major event that influenced the setting. After that, zoom in further. Tell them about their surroundings. What will they see around them if they would climb a hill? Try to inspire wanderlust with your descriptions. Let the players know that there is a world to explore. After that, describe the place the campaign will begin at. If it's a town, describe it in a few sentences. Think about the things that set it apart from other towns. Describe the location of the opening scene and give their characters some context as to what they are doing there. Like always, this is my take on exposition. If you feel creative, write whatever you think is awesome and relevant for your campaign. It's probably better than anything I can tell you to do. If you're out of ideas, you can take what I read at the beginning of this video and use it as a template for your own. You'll find it in the description. The best advice I can give regarding the writing is to avoid the long expositions. If you end up writing more than 2 pages, it's too long. You might lose your players halfway reading it. After the exposition is presented, the game begins. Engage the players. If you're in a tavern, have someone take orders from them or interact with them. You could ask the players to describe their character's physical appearance to help get a better image in everyone's head. The rest is up to you, my friend. So I'll try to summarize the process of beginning a new campaign. First, we have an idea of a campaign or module that we want to try out. We find a group of friends or random people who want to play with us. We share the genre and theme of the game, plus whatever teaser we can muster. If we know the hook for the beginning, we'll share it with them now. After that, we set a date and time for session 0. And in the meantime, we asked players to think about characters. If possible, we work together with them on backstory or at least outlines of one. We'll brainstorm, answer questions, and give them the information they need to create their characters. After that, we plan out everything we need for the first session or two. We'll probably discuss this part in future videos. If we're running a module, we'll make sure we've read the necessary information. Then we get session 0, like we talked about here, starting with out-of-game aspects, going over mechanics and house rules, some last-minute character work, and finally building the party. If we still have time, we'll read out the exposition and start playing. This is the ideal scenario in my opinion. Another idea we've mentioned is to run a mini session for each subgroup we've created when building the party. In order to pull this off, I think we'll need to finish session 0 right after forming the party. I've never actually tried this one, but I will definitely give it a go when I start another campaign. I think I'll write a different exposition for each of them. I'll let you know how it turned out when I get there. A different method in case the players do not have a character concept prepared is to build character concepts during session 0. If that's the case, I would suggest we'll still divide them into subgroups. However, we won't need to separate them into different rooms because their characters aren't fleshed out yet, and there's not much they can tell about them. We'll end the session there and work on two fronts between session 0 and session 1. We'll work on the backstory of the character with each of the players, possibly building character sheets with them. And at the same time, we'll open a chat for each subgroup and have them share some information about their characters, plus some of the grounds for their adventuring. When we reach session 1, we will wrap up the character sheets, read out the exposition, and start playing. So that's it for this video. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you found anything here useful, please click the like button and subscribe for more videos like this one in the future. In the description you'll find the exposition I used. Feel free to change it and make it your own. I'd like to hear you guys in the comments because this is a huge topic and I'm certain I didn't cover all of it. Tell me what I missed. Until next time, see you beyond the screen.